Welcome to KonKon's Cantina. Grab a drink, sit back, and relax.
What is up, everybody? It is your boy, it's KonKon, back at it again. This week, guys, very excited to come to you. This week, we are talking about 3D printing, our one of two, maybe one of three series where we are going to be explaining to you everything that you need to know to get to introduction to 3D printing. Once again, I'm your boy, it's KonKon, and joined with me virtually all the way from Texas, my boy, Benjamin Asher. Benjamin, say hello to everybody.
Hello, how you doing?
Guys, super excited. Once again, 3D printing has really taken over, the fandoms of all sorts. Marvel, Star Wars in particular, cosplay in general. 3D printing has now become the go-to to prop making and hobbyists, trinkets, Etsy, eBay, you name it, Amazon even. 3D printing has really started to take over. So Ben has really taken just a huge dive into the industry as a whole. He's gotten extremely good at it, and he's going to give us just the basics, the bullet points on what you need to look for. So on this episode, it's what you're looking for when it comes to a 3D printer, how much you should be basically looking to spend, and really the direction on what you're wanting that 3D printer for. We also have some information. We have some questions from our listeners that Ben is also going to answer, and it's going to be super exciting. So hopefully that you guys get to learn something from this, and this gives you a true direction on where you get to buy your 3D printer. Ben, tell the people where they can find you first and foremost.
I am on Instagram as Benjamin Asher, one word, BenjaminAsher, and you'll find me. It's mostly I'm a photographer. Primarily, I worked in commercial studios, so a lot of the photos there are Star Wars related, some food photography, watch photography.
Lots of deep macro stuff too.
Some
really nice pictures. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, really nice pictures.
I try and always work on some little projects too, so it's not just 3D printing. Some of it also is commercial laser work, which is a fun toy. I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Guys, housekeeping, of course, merch. We do have merch. We do have some inspired threads, some t-shirts inspired for the galaxy far, far away. If you notice on my back, of course, you've seen the shirt once. I'll show you again. This is our Luke T, like my father before me, our Return of the Jedi inspired Luke t-shirt. You can find that in the link to our bio. And of course, Patreon, if you would like to support us and this podcast. All of our episodes now are supported by Patreon. We really, really appreciate and thank each one of our Patreons. As we talked about last week, we had a couple new Patreons last week. Guys, we very much appreciate it. Patreon starts at a $3 tier, and that is general support for the podcast. A lot does go into this, and we want to bring you guys a great product, and we hope that you appreciate it. A great benefit of the Patreon is a discount on these shirts. Once again, these shirts are tri-blend, really, really soft, really, really nice quality. We know that you guys will enjoy it. And of course, you can catch us on social media at all of the following: KonKon's Cantina, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. If you would like to work with us and this podcast, feel free to reach out to us at konkonscantina@gmail.com. Of course, we have our Facebook group, Twitter, and if you would like to join our Discord, hit up the Linktree in all of the above social medias that we mentioned, and that is how you will find the invite to the Discord. Please rate this podcast 5 stars if you can. That is obviously what we seek. And without further ado, the agenda of this episode: we're going to give you an update on Justin that you're definitely going to want to hear. Then Ben is going to give us his Star Wars saga. Benjamin is going to tell us how he started with Star Wars, where he's at now, and what has brought him to this point, and his love for Star Wars. And then, of course, the main body of this episode, we will be giving you the introduction, if you will, to 3D printing. Talking about basic printers, how much you should spend, and the direction of that 3D printing, that hobby, if you're looking to get into it. And that'll be the wrap up to this episode. And then next week we'll be coming back with more details as far as joining 501st, what you can use the 3D printers for in particular, and just more expounding on the intricate details of 3D printing. But You already know. We are a Cantina podcast. So we're going to go into the Cantina right now.
Welcome to KonKon's Cantina. What are you having? But remember, no droids.
I am drinking something that I am very, very excited about. I am drinking Old Grandad 114. This was introduced to me by Troy Cuff. And, you know, when he handed it to me and he didn't tell me what it was, he told me that it was 114 proof, which just immediately caught my eye. I love, really, me personally, I can't get behind anything that is not 100 proof or above. I mean, 100 proof is just, it's what I like. It's my taste. I need a bite. Old Grandad 114 has gone through multiple ownership changes over the last couple of decades. It goes all the way back to the Walden's family. It's a United States distillery. It actually comes from Jim Beam, and it is a 63% corn, 27% rye, and 10% malt. On the nose, it's extremely, extremely sharp, which I personally like. You also get a little bit of kind of like a rye smell. It's very sweet, but once again, very sharp, kind of acetone because it's 114 proof. And I'd say it's definitely a mid-body, and the back end, it's got a nice burn. Once again, it's 114 proof, but it's really, really nice and sweet. Really, really deep flavors on this one. This is a 9 out of 10 Mandos, because the crazy part about this one, Ben, is the price point on this is $31 a bottle.
For a
so
liter?
to find, here we go. We can see it on camera right here. So to have something of that caliber, 114 proof, to only be $31 is just it's an absolute crazy bang for buck. It's totally worth it. I love it. 9 out of 10 Mandos is what I'm giving it. That's how many, all the Mandos in the covert down there, they throw back all of this. They make some old fashions with it. That's what they do. Ben, what are you drinking?
I wanted to start with beer for the first podcast, and something low ABV, not too crazy. I'm drinking Pilsner Urquell. Really, really good Czech beer. The interesting history behind it, it is the world's first, what we now know as a Pilsner. And it's taken the term Pilsner because the name of the brewery is Pilsner Urquell. It's become synonymous with what they just created, which was a pale lager. So Pilsner Urquell made the first pale lager a little over 175 years ago. Still the same recipe today.
That's a long time, 175 years.
And now 2/3 of the beer produced around the world is Pilsner, or pale lager, which is a throwback to the actual brewery. Really, really good place. There's 3 or 4 really good Czech beers. I've been to the Czech Republic, to Prague 3 different times, and I knew that it's one of the places.
I'm jealous of that, by the way.
I know it's one of the places on your list to go, so that's why I wanted to review it, and hopefully your wife will watch the video.
You're rubbing salt into the wound. You're leaving me
I'll
burning
go
on the shores of Mustafar. Okay, I get it.
I'll go with you, and this is what it looks like. Really, really good stuff. It's a great beer.
Yeah. Now, as you're taking that sip, give me some of the notes. Is it a mid body? Is it light?
It's a wonderful mowing the yard beer. I mean, going out camping.
No, that's a great. Yeah.
It's the kind of beer we take camping. We spend a lot of time outside, out in the outdoors.
So it's not heavy.
No, it's just a really nice, smooth, not too hopsy, but I mean it's a really good beer. I could drink a few of them.
Yeah, I mean that's something that me and Justin, we set the bar at, is like, you know, is this a beer while you're mowing the lawn that you go inside, you grab one, you slam it, or you, like me in my riding lawnmower, because I'm just full dad mode already, I have a cup holder on my lawnmower, and it's one that I'd have right next to me, you know, and that's a good thing, because when it's hot outside, you know, you don't want something like super heavy.
Well, right next to me I have a cooler with a couple of those and a few other beers. So in case I do get bored halfway through the podcast with the beer, not with the podcast, then
Thanks for clarifying. I appreciate that.
Yes. So yeah, no, it's really good stuff, and I'll have a beer waiting for you when you guys come here and visit soon.
Ben, give us your Mando rating. There's Mandalorians, they're down in the covert, okay? They haven't showered in a while. They need refreshment. You've walked down, you have this cooler. You've passed through the giant skull, the skull, the Mythosaurus skull. You're going in, they all want a beer. How many out of 10 are enjoying this beer?
Well, for someone who has walked around in Texas in full armor, I can certainly say that it's a great beer for coming inside or, drinking outside when it's still hot. It's great beer.
Great beer. 9.
Yeah.
What's your rating? 1 through 10.
Out of 10.
Yeah.
I'd say probably an 8. I don't get into the craft brews, and I don't buy anything based off of how vibrant the cover art is. I just like a lot of history and a really good beer, and I don't mind going halfway over in the world to try it.
That is totally fine. Everybody's me and Jeff, we are suckers for artwork, right? But once it's about the drinkability, right? Isn't that Budweiser? Didn't they make up that word, drinkability? But anyway, 8 out of 10. I will have to pick some up. I'll have to find some.
It's not necessarily the very best beer, but I wanted to try and also rate something on the podcast that you guys haven't had before.
Yeah.
And I know you haven't had this one, and I have a few more lined up for the next couple of weeks that pretty sure you haven't had.
We appreciate that. We appreciate that. Guys, real quick, we are going to give you an update on Justin. Okay, this is very solemn. This is very serious, and we're going to talk about it right now. Ben, I believe you had a couple of words to say. How about you take it off first?
Well, you told me we heard he is experiencing some complications with the physical therapy relating to his recovery.
Yes.
They think the complications arise most likely from him supporting with his arms the crushing weight of the unsubstantiated theory of the Razor Crest being the name of the ship rather than the model name.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so, it's really sad. Unfortunately, that the manufacturer Razor Crest.
If he can let go of that, he'll be back to normal in no time.
I've tried to talk to him, Ben. I've tried to tell him that Razor Crest is the manufacturer. It is a Razor Crest. It is the one-off. It is the Razor Crest.
The A10 Warthog.
Listen. Yeah. It is the Razor Crest. Ben, you were telling me before the podcast. Did you actually find something in the wreckage? Were you able to find that?
We're not until next week. I'm waiting for it to be shipped here.
Okay, the archaeologists are still getting the dust off.
No, it's just a friend. So I mean, there is, he wants substantial proof in hand. It's
coming.
The model name is the Razor Crest.
Yes. Okay. So. Well, hopefully, when Justin lets go of his idiocracy, he will get much better sooner.
We had to pick on him a little bit when he's not here to defend himself. But who are we kidding? Even if he was here, he couldn't defend himself. So
Benjamin with the zingers. Yeah, I mean, what's he gonna do? Fight back? I mean, come on.
So yeah,
Justin, we love you, and you're still wrong about the Razor Crest. Moving on,
and until he accepts my friend request, I'm gonna keep, I'll watch. Well, even when he comes up, if it comes up, he accepts it. I'll be easier on him.
Even when he does, let's be honest, we're not going to be any easier on him. Yeah, come on, let's be honest. No. Ben, now is the time, the part of the show. Thank you very much for being a new guest on the show. It's a lot
of fun. I've been dropping subtle hints in the comments of the videos for months.
Yes.
Not so subtle.
Not so subtle
now.
You got
the point. No.
Yeah, it's okay. Listen, tell us your Star Wars saga. Tell us where you started with Star Wars, in particular, what your earliest memory of Star Wars was, and what's continued your love through the saga up until this point.
My family, for as long as I'm one of 3 brothers, I have a younger brother and an older brother. For as long as each of us have been born, my parents have been to the opening day of every Star Wars movie, and I was brought as a very, very little kid from Return of the Jedi onward, and then ever since then I've kept the tradition. Rogue One and even the prequels and the sequels. So been to every movie ever released, Disney and Disney World, and then now that Disney owns the IP for Star Wars, it's just been an explosion. Some ups, some downs, but
for sure.
I'm excited to have new content, and the fact that some of it is just amazing. Mandalorian, Rogue One, some of the best footage to come out of the
You're
Star
a big
Wars
fan
universe.
of Rogue One.
I
You're a huge
love
fan of
Rogue
Rogue
One.
One. Yeah.
Everything they redid it. I think that's Gareth Edwards is the biggest fan to take on a Star Wars movie. So even before he did the movie, he'd already been to the filming locations of A New Hope, in Tunisia. That's one of the things he sold them on. He was a fan. A couple years ago, we went to the filming locations of Last Jedi. We were in Croatia, where they filmed in Dubrovnik, and got to see some of the items seen on screen, which were still there because we were only there a couple of months after they wrapped.
You've been to Naboo too, correct?
I've been to Italy several times, but not Naboo, not where they actually filmed that.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely like, I would love to go to New Zealand and go to certain spots where Lord of the Rings was filmed. That would be amazing. I mean, I would love to go to Tunisia, but I think the very first place that I would love to go, I love seeing the people that have taken like the Polaroids, or they take the
then and now.
like they have the picture of like Anakin and Padme like standing out the balcony looking at the lake, and they're like literally there, like they're at that balcony where the movie was filmed.
So I have not been there, and we had some other trips planned. We actually had to push back our recent trip. We were going to Scotland.
Shout out to COVID.
That'll be put back a little while, but soon we have a lot of new places to go.
Yeah, for sure.
I do a lot of travel photography, which is also a lot of what's on my Instagram.
Give them your Instagram one more time.
Benjamin Asher.
Yep, and spelled exactly how it sounds.
Yeah. But I'm also blending in some of the photos. I came back from Galaxy's Edge with you about a year ago, and
we had a blast.
Ended up with about 5,000 photos there, and I basically photographed it with the same eye as I travel across Europe. So I tried to really photograph it as though it was a real place, and it was a lot of fun. It
was awesome. It was awesome. Ben, thank you very much for sharing that Star Wars saga with us. The main purpose, the reason why you were here, everybody, 3D printing. Now, Ben, I told you that we had some questions from readers, from our listeners. I have one that was really good that I'm going to ask you now. We're going to start this off right with a banger. Okay,
I don't know what's coming up, so we'll see.
Yeah, you don't know what the question is, which is fine. It's not a crazy question. So this comes from as we like to call Anthony One, Antoine DeFish, Anthony, one of our listeners. He says, and by the way, he is a 501st approved TK. By the way, so
okay.
Yep, he's one of our listeners in Jacksonville, Florida.
Blaster fodder.
Yes, and it's actually it has to do with a little bit of blaster and 3D printing work. So let's start with this question, and then we're going to get into the main body of the episode.
I love TKs. No one will ever get as much attention as a TK, which is a classic stormtrooper, or Darth Vader.
They're most recognizable for sure.
Well, they're the most requested in the 501st. I'm going to get a TK.
Yeah.
Just to have it in the collection. My wife, who's the most supportive, she wants it on a mannequin in
the house.
In the house.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
I would love to do that as well. Anthony says, whenever I bought my E11 blaster, I had no problem sanding the little print ridges smooth. However, I also recently bought a 3D printed Ghost from Destiny that seemed to keep the ridges no matter how much I sanded it. Does this have to do with the quality of printer that will help in this process, or is it possible that different types of plastics will change the ridges?
The first question would be, if he's here, is what was the technology? Was it printed using a filament printer or resin printer? That's something we're going to get into in a minute. It's very different. Filament can print much larger on a much more affordable budget. Resin printers like what's back here, and this is actually a rather expensive, newer resin printer, and they get up even more expensive. You're limited by size. So resin printers like this one are always going to have much more detail. But even then, depending on, if all things were even, the two that he has, there's always going to be, I hate to say shortcuts, but it's never going to be cost effective to print to sell models for someone else of the same caliber as you would print them for yourselves.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand.
So what you're
that.
saying is it's most likely that this person used either a cheaper file or a cheaper filament.
The file probably wouldn't affect print lines, but
okay.
I have a filament printer, and we'll get into that later. Filament printers or FDM printers, they basically print plastic that's on a spool. It kind of looks like what you feed into your weed eater. So it's a spool of filament. It comes down, and essentially for easier explanation, it prints like toothpaste. One layer at a time, and then the head goes up to the next layer and does the next layer, and then so on. And that prints, for me, I print at very high detail, very slow, very thin layer lines with a really small nozzle. And to give you an example, something I printed, a chest piece, took me 10 days to print. So obviously, just for one piece of armor, just from like here to here, it's not necessarily cost effective to have that running to then be able to sell it.
So 240 hours took you one chess piece.
Yes. Now, not everyone's going to be doing it the same as me. I'm a neat freak.
I was going to say you're definitely a perfectionist.
I am.
Yeah, for sure.
No amount of filling is necessary. Filing, sanding, putty. The thicker the print lines, it's going to take a lot more after prep work and sanding, and sometimes you'll never get that detail back. Especially a good example is when people print the Mando helmet. I haven't sanded it yet, but this is a file that also, I think about 10 days also on that print there.
I would say that's easily one of the most demanded files right now. Easy.
And what happens a lot on this file is people will print it with thicker layer lines, because you can print this in about 3 days, but not at the same level of detail as this. This has not been sanded yet, and I've been holding it off for like 2 weeks, no sanding. So this,
I mean, it looks good even not sanded, to be honest.
There is no sanding. When you'll see it the most is in the ridges and what's called the mohawk. So people will print it with thicker layer height, so taller layer lines, with a bigger nozzle. And it's true, you can go back afterwards, and this is a very forgiving model. This one is, for the most part, not a lot of detail, but you'll see it in the mohawk. And then they'll usually use like Bondo, and then that loses a lot of the detail. It basically kind of gums it up, and it ends up looking, we kind of joke, sometimes I see them, I'm like, it looks a little bit like it's made out of cheese, because it'll be kind of puttied up, and then they'll sand it down, and you lose the detail, and it almost looks like a really good cake made out of fondant.
Yeah.
And instead of that sharp, crisp lines that you just can't get back, and even when you're using like needle files to try and get in to all the little nooks and crannies, it's still never the same trying to file out that. So I would rather take a lot longer for the print if it means I don't have to sand as much, because my time, I'm getting pulled so many different ways. I'd rather take 2 or 3 times longer to print the file and get detail that I might not be able to get back.
So to answer Anthony's question, it sounds like that the seller could have picked a shorter print time, therefore causing bigger print lines, making it harder to sand.
Or if it was filament, there could have been some other issues that could have caused some layer shifts, or it might, a number of different things. If he wants to send me a photo of the image, I could probably tell him which one that is.
So getting into the body of the episode, let's talk about what is the end goal of printing. So let's go straight there. So with any hobby, that there has to be, there doesn't necessarily have to be an end goal, but most people, I think you would agree, Ben, buy 3D printers for one of two things. Either they're buying them to make money, or they're buying them to further their profession, whether that be they're not full-time, but they're heavy into cosplay and prop making, whatever the case may be. Let's just talk briefly, Ben, about what is your end goal.
Making things you can't buy.
Exactly.
In some cases, or that it's not cost-effective to buy. When I first wanted to get a printer, or when I first wanted it, I wanted to be a shore trooper. Ever since I saw Rogue One, that was my goal. I wanted to always be a stormtrooper, and then when I saw the shore trooper, that was it for me. And I wanted at first to just pay somebody else to print it, and I just didn't understand why that wasn't a feasible option. And now that I have a printer, I realize that, first of all, to get it to the level I want, I'm looking at probably 6 months of printing for the shore trooper.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of little pieces, a lot of parts, and it's not cost effective to pay somebody else to do that.
Yeah. And I do know that the printing can fail, too. You could be in a 10-day print, and it could fail on day number 9.
I'm actually taking a couple days off because I had a 10-day print fail about 5 days in. And that's about when I got the resin printer. So I've been doing filament printing with a very large printer for a little over a year.
Okay.
So I'm not necessarily as experienced as some, but I come from a different background. I worked even in photo studios in Dallas as a set builder. So I, not in the movie industry, but in doing a lot of prop work, things for commercial studios for a couple of years. Worked at a number of different studios. Even now, I have a very extensive workshop. So I have a lot of tools. I have a lot of toys. I have, I think, 3 bandsaws and just every bit of tool and that I could possibly want. So I have a lot that I can go off of, which is nice.
So right off the rip, would you tell people that this is a inexpensive hobby or an expensive hobby?
It depends on your opinion of expensive.
Okay.
You have some expensive lightsabers. Are those expensive or
do.
Those reasonably priced?
No,
in your opinion.
Yes, you know what? Now that I have asked that question and you have countered with my lightsaber addiction, I now completely understand. Let's tell people real quick. Let's talk about the difference between resin and filament, and then we'll talk about kind of the introductory point.
Yeah, the upfront cost can be a little bit more, but then afterwards, and I have some things hiding off screen to show you. The costs of what you can make on a per part basis is very inexpensive.
Yeah.
Most people start in filament printers, and then when you're kind of held back in a lot of the things like detail, really awesome detail. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Resin printing, just like everyone, I'm like, all right, I'm going to go and get a resin printer. And now all of a sudden, man, I love the resin printer so much. That's why I've just been focusing gung-ho on small props.
Yeah.
And taking a little bit of a break from the resin or from the filament, but I will get right back to it. I have the next few parts for the shore trooper lined up.
So let's talk about resin versus filament, aka FDM. Can you give us a brief synopsis on what the actual difference between those two are?
So the technology has changed a lot in just the last year for resin. So before that, it was just cost prohibitive to get a resin printer with enough build volume to make anything other than just really small items.
Meaning it was very expensive, correct?
It was very expensive, and the only ones you could get, and they were still expensive, could only print small items. I mean, they might have a build surface of just like 3 inches by 4 inches.
We talked off screen. You were saying people like to use them a lot for like D&D and stuff.
Yeah, like miniatures for game board play. So things like that, and that's what it was perfect at. Great detail, but you're limited by size and scale. You couldn't even really do like a blaster in one piece. Just about a year or two ago, a couple years ago, and now it's getting more affordable. So I would actually lean more people. I'm trying to get you to get a resin printer.
Yes.
And I have a recommendation for you. It's
Well,
right,
see,
right
we
back
talked about the
there.
C9. Hang on, we're gonna get into that. Continue.
What was where were we going with that next?
We were talking about the overall difference between resin and filament. You're talking about resin.
Okay.
We used to be held back by kind of price and the scale of which you could print.
So the big thing I think mostly comes down to what are your end goals. There's first of all, I think the biggest thing is what are you planning on printing and how big are they?
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be cosplaying in a full suit of armor, and it doesn't have to be Star Wars. There's people that do Iron Man suits. There's people that do.
They do Mjolnir. They do weapons from. They do Star Trek phasers. They do tons of stuff.
Yeah, the bigger costumes like that. Even now, you'll probably want to get a filament printer, and you can actually get some filament printers. I recommend Creality. It's a really well-known, well-liked printer. The CR10S Pro and the CR10 Max are both
Which is what
really,
I'm looking at.
The Max?
No, the Pro.
CR10S Pro.
The Pro, yep.
So I have the Max. The Max is huge. It's almost, I think it's 480 cubed in millimeters. So it's, I printed an entire chest piece in one go. I can print a helmet, any helmet in one piece if I so choose. It is an awesome printer.
So for some cross comparison, because I know that your recommendation for me was the Pro, can you print most helmets or buckets in one go on the Pro?
I believe, I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
I if nothing else, 4 or 5 pieces. And it sounds like, oh, that's a lot of pieces, but you really oftentimes they'll cut it for the height, and they'll do in quadrants, so the 4 pieces for the lower bucket, and then either the whole shell or the whole shell split down the middle. So
and that's where where I would venture any of our listeners who are looking to get into cosplay and prop making is there's always kind of there's always hidden stuff kind of behind prop making. I've been cosplaying since high school. So my junior year of high school is really when I started making my first costumes. Yeah, so Mandalorian was the first thing that I tackled. My own custom Mandalorian. That was 2009. It took me a full year to build. This was before 3D printing. This was, I mean, people were doing resin casts and whatnot, but I mean, I was making things out of cardboard, and then I was using fiberglass to make them hard, and then I was using Bondo to sand them and make them smooth. And it literally took me a year and close to $800, maybe even $1,000 to create my first costume.
Yeah.
And even vacuum forming, that was kind of the big kid on the block at that time. And now moving forward to now, we have the 3D printing. And what I was getting at is even like with the S, if you had to print that helmet in quadrants, you're going to have the experience and the knowledge to put those quadrants together and then fill the seams. So once again, really doing your research in YouTube and understanding where you want to go with this hobby. Is this to make money? Is this to, make things to sell people? Or is this just for you? You kind of almost have to have a skill set going into it. I don't think that this is something... Look, anybody has the capability to just get into something. But I think prop making as a whole takes a lot of... it takes a certain level of finesse, I think you would agree,
this year,
to get into.
I would argue that this year a lot of technology has changed and opened up the opportunity for resin printers to do at an affordable price what was only capable before in a reasonable budget on a filament printer. Especially if you're okay with putting a helmet together in pieces. which would you rather have? A print that's made in one piece but will never have the same level of detail?
Mm-hmm.
Or have it printed in resin, and you're going to have the seams in there anyway, but the level of detail is amazing. Almost no sanding is required, which means you can skip the level of Bondo.
Yeah.
So you don't lose more detail to hide print lines that are just not there.
Yeah. That's a perfect segue into, let's talk about the $200 resin printers, right? If somebody wants to get their feet wet in the hobby, let's talk about that real quick.
So I came from, my last big purchase was a couple of years ago, and we'll get into that later, but I got a very large commercial laser. And the technology there is you want it to last because it's an expensive investment.
Yes.
You want to go as big and as powerful as you can. And I kind of had that same mentality when I was looking at printers, and especially resin printers, thinking, oh, I need it to be as big as possible because I don't want to be held back by wanting to print something that's just too small to fit.
Yeah.
But the one thing that's different about resin printers is they do have an expendable screen. Now, the newer technology, instead of it lasting hundreds of hours, the screen lasts thousands of hours. So it's not as bad. But there's an argument to be made that you can actually benefit from buying a $200 resin printer to get your feet wet and start printing small items. And then when you get a larger resin printer as you progress, then you can hold off and print the larger items on the large printer. And if you only want to print some small items, print them on the small printer. And the reason for that is the larger the printer, the larger the screen, and that piece of expendable equipment, or that actually goes up in replacement cost. So a $200 printer, first of all, the printer is only $200, $250, something like that. I think the screens are usually about $20.
Did you have a model name for this one?
I haven't looked at the smaller ones, but I have been using Anycubic, which I have mine back here.
Yep.
And I know that they make some smaller versions of those. You'll see them in I think they're being pushed, some of them right now, $219.
Where would you direct people to look for that? Amazon, eBay?
I would go just from Amazon. I love Amazon Prime. I love that you have the 30 days that you're protected if you get it through Prime, if you have any problems.
I think it's 90 days. Depending on the item, sometimes they go even higher. Is that what it is?
30 days during the holidays. They do actually extend holiday returns, which is, I believe, 90 days, but you have to buy it within that window. Now, we're past that window now, but sometime the end of the year, I think it's like November, December, they extend it so that you could actually have it for, I don't remember if it's 90 days, but they do have an extended return window, and that's awesome.
So you talked about the screens being $20. So does that mean that sometimes screens have to be replaced?
So they do. So the way it works, I know you
tell them what the screen is first.
So the technology behind it, if you've ever used Photoshop, you'll know what a mask is. I didn't understand the technology completely until I had a printer, and then I realized exactly what was going on. What it basically is, the bottom is just an array of UV LEDs.
Mm-hmm.
The screen that we talk about is basically a see-through screen, but it can display what is essentially a mask, or what you might call a resist. And wherever it doesn't show up black, it allows the UV light to cure the liquid resin wherever it's not masking or blocking that light. And then the build plate raises out of the liquid resin, a very small amount, 50 microns or even less. At 50 microns, the detail is already amazing. I've tried some prints at 20 microns. It takes a lot longer, and honestly, I didn't notice that much difference. But it's insane, the level of detail. There is a chemical reaction, as the resin cures under UV light, it gets hot, and that degrades over time the screen. So by the more that you're using the resin printer, the more it uses up the screen, and eventually you have to replace it. So a $220 $20 resin printer. It may only be a $20 screen. It's not a big deal. A printer like this one, they don't actually have released the prices for the replacement screens, probably in the $100 to $150 range. Now the difference is this printer was, I think they just dropped the price about $100. I bought it right when they dropped the price, and I got it for $730 plus tax. So it came out to, I think, $802 shipped on Prime with tax.
Okay.
So that's where I'm saying it's actually an interesting argument that if you want to get your feet wet, start with a $200 printer, and working forward, you have two printers. And if you don't need to print something on the big printer, print on the small printer where the screen is a lot less expensive to replace.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting argument that's why I've suggested to you, get a $199 or $220 printer, get your feet wet, start learning from it, and then when you can afford to spend $800, get a really good printer, because you'll still use both.
And a lot of these things, like the blasters, lightsabers, of course we're talking from a Star Wars perspective, those are printed in pieces as is already. Yeah, so as you're showing on screen. So did you print that in one piece?
No, this is actually made in the resin printer, and I haven't even finished all the pieces. I have to redo a couple things. The grips are still missing, but the pieces are just amazing. This actually,
it looks really good already.
This actually goes on, and there's even the set screw which gets glued in place for the flash hider. There's the slide for the elevation on the rear. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, the level of detail is just amazing.
So you have my address. Feel free when it's done, send it over, and we'll call it even.
I have some things. I've been asking. It took me a while to get something from you that I needed in order to work on some projects to send you for the podcast. So
yes. Listen,
I couldn't get
got a lot
something
going on
to you in time for our podcast.
I know.
You could be holding up a special gift.
Yes.
Right now.
And we're gonna talk about that later. So which printer was this done on? Which that was on the resin?
So this was done on the resin printer here, and the reason that there's two of them, they're not both printers. So this is a printer, and this is an optional luxury. It's a curing station. So when you use a resin printer, and I turn this off in the position where you can see the build plate is up, and then there's a vat of liquid resin in the bottom. So you pour the resin in the bottom, the build plate comes down, and it cures the first layer, second layer, until you get through all of them.
So remember, we have some audio listeners only. You're pointing to a printer that is behind you on your left, and what is the name of that printer again? The brand?
It is an Anycubic Photon Mono X.
Okay.
So the X refers to the size. It's big. It's extra big. So
large 10. Yep.
The mono refers to what is a rather new technology. I think there's only a few printers, and it's only been out for the last year, the technology in general. Mono has to do with that screen and the type of display and how good it is at cutting back light. Mono displays, I would definitely suggest. It's a brand new technology. It is better on the screens, so your screen lasts a lot longer than older technology. This is rated at thousands of hours rather than 300-400 hours, something like that. But it also allows you to print about 4 times faster. So instead of normally about 20 seconds per layer, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're printing a blaster that's in pieces and comes out to about 3,000 layers, that adds up. This is printed at 1.7 seconds per layer at 50 microns, and the tallest piece is the limiting factor. So no matter how much you have on the build plate, how many little pieces, it still takes the same amount of time as just one piece. The time is just limited by how tall the tallest piece on the build plate is.
So at this point, let's talk about prep work And then to wrap up the episode, let's talk about what people can expect kind of like on Etsy and buying files, if that makes sense. And then on our second introduction, our second part to this episode, we're going to go into some more detail, especially like resin options, and then we'll talk more about full-on cosplay. At that point, I'll also have, I do have a resin helmet that's based on a 3D printer that we can go over. And we can, we can go over some more of that. So let's talk about prep work. We've kind of touched on this before, and this is what I was alluding to a little bit earlier as far as
if you value your time.
Yes.
And,
so I'll let you kick it off. Yeah. You're always going to need a little bit of prep work, though. Am I correct?
Very little. So, for instance, should I show you something that I have not sanded?
Yeah, so let's see something that's been sanded. Okay. Once again, sorry for our audio listeners.
Yeah.
We are at about the 45-minute time mark if you want to just go to YouTube so that you can see what Ben is holding up.
So this is something I just kind of started. It's in 3 pieces, and it's because I'm still sanding some of the points where it comes together.
See, you saw our T-shirt and you were inspired to print.
This is the coolest lightsaber ever made. This is Obi-Wan's lightsaber. Another day we can get into the details of all the screen use parts, and that's a 15-minute episode. I don't know how familiar you are with all the parts.
Well, beans is how one of them comes from a World War II fighter jet that can basically not be found fighter plane that basically can't be found anymore.
A Rolls-Royce Derwent engine. And
is that what it is?
Yes. It's the flame tube. It's also where you find IG-88's head, that same engine. What makes that part, I would say, difficult to find, but that's an understatement. It was a late model update or upgrade to the engine that very few engines even saw that upgrade, and then it immediately went out of service afterwards. So there are people that buy from out of the country Rolls-Royce engines and pay them to be shipped just to see if when they disassemble it, it has the right parts inside. There's no value you can place on a screen
Once again, whole nother episode. So
that's a 15-minute episode. So
what you're holding up.
This is to kind of hold me back. These are the parts to basically what will become that, and I can put this on. So there is some sanding on some parts of this and not on others, so you can kind of see. I have to still sand the connection of where this goes in because the tolerances on these are very, very tight. But the level of detail, if you can see on this, parts of it are not sanded. In fact, mostly only the sanding I've done on here is just the parts where they connect together, which we'll get into in more detail another day. But the actual surface, so this piece here, which is actually based on a World War II British rifle grenade, is unsanded. So that has no prep work at all. And neither does this piece here. There's no prep work here, no prep work here. The only thing I've sanded on everything in my hand is just the pommel. And not even extensively. I just did a little bit on the top, and so except for this pommel, nothing in my hands has been sanded. So yeah, I value my time, but I still want the detail and the accuracy. So that changed everything for me with having a resin printer. And I've only had the resin printer for a little over 4 weeks, and I have buckets of things I've produced. Just 4 blasters. I haven't even printed in 4 days because I just had to slow myself down because of the resin. It gets a little expensive. Not that much more expensive than filament.
If you had to, so if you had to guesstimate, how much do you think it cost you to print Obi-Wan's lightsaber in resin, and then what would you think it would cost in filament FDA?
Well, the FDM, the filament is...
Or FDM, yes.
Yeah, very... I mean, it's very
FDA,
inexpensive.
that's another department in the government.
Yeah.
Or somewhere, I don't know.
So in something that small, it's negligible, the difference. Because you're buying filament by weight, which is usually a kilo which is 2.2 pounds for about $20 or $22. I mean, that's
Okay.
cheap. To give you an example, the Mandalorian helmet that you saw earlier, with the supports needed to support it as it was printing, was under a roll. So that was, even for something really big like a Mando helmet, about $20 in material with a filament. So with something like a lightsaber, I could weigh it, but I think you're looking at about $10 in resin. To me, that's nothing for what you get. Of course, it becomes harder to swallow if you want to print something huge where it weighs a lot. The resin comes a little bit different. It's not by weight, it's by volume. So the resin is 1 liter, and there's a lot of resins. This is all printed in Tech, which is my absolute go-to resin. They make great resins, and it's not even much difference in price than some of the cheaper resin. And this is $40 per liter, and that's shipped on Amazon Prime. They actually had some on sale for $36.99, and I bought quite a bit a week ago. And that's the same price as some of the, quote, cheaper brands, and Tech is very well liked. I also got some of their more specialty resins. This resin is a great resin. It can be brittle. They call it ABS-like, so it has some of the characteristics of ABS, but it's still a brittle material.
A lot of my armor is ABS.
Yeah, ABS is awesome. Now, is it printed or was that molded?
It's vacuum formed. Yeah, vacuum formed.
Yeah,
and
so
cast.
vac formed is a whole different thing, and that is what the Biker Scout is. We can touch on that whenever a little later.
Yeah, we can talk about that later for sure.
So as far as printing in a material like this, it is inherently brittle, but there are some specialty resins that cost a little bit more. So instead of $36 to $40 a liter, the same company makes some others like this is what's called their fast resin, because it's just fast and some relatively cheap. It's about as cheap as you can buy.
Yeah.
But they make some really good resins that aren't that much more expensive. They make a resin called Blue, which is also made by Tech, which is a very strong resin, and it's only $10 more per liter. So instead of $40, it's $50. But they also make an amazing resin. It's by itself, it's flexible, very tough, but it's flexible, so you can make something and drop it, and it has a lot of shock resistance built in. And even for something like that, it's $65 a liter. Now that's not that expensive, but the fascinating thing about resin is liquid. So you can actually blend 2 or more resins together to kind of get a custom blend of different properties. So one of the things people are doing, and I haven't had a chance because they just came in, some of them yesterday and another one today, those Tech specialty resins, a lot of people will blend them together, all 3 or 2 of the 3 together to get kind of custom blends. One of the popular things to do is that flexible resin is called Tenacious. It's their $65 resin. People do that at like an 80-20 split, so 20%. Okay. So really it doesn't make it that much more expensive because you're only using 20% of it added to what's already a very inexpensive resin. So it really only puts it at like maybe $45, $50 a liter, because you're using very little of what's not even that much more expensive of a resin. And it gives you an inherent shock resistance to a part. So instead of being completely flexible, it allows you to drop a blaster from, waist height and not shatter.
Yeah.
So I have to start testing that. I just got that. It's been out of stock, so I bought some of that, and it came in today. So I didn't have a chance to obviously put it to its test, but it's very well liked. Very well regarded.
And that's a whole nother thing. I mean, it's almost like a cosplay episode kind of in itself, is like even like buckets and going to cons and having things to transport your armor in is extremely important. Knowing that like if you drop things that are most likely resin printed, even dropping things like my Mando helmet that's resin casted and all that stuff, you have the opportunity to break it.
Yeah, it doesn't mean the vac forming is indestructible.
No, absolutely not.
Forming,
especially
like the classic TK or even the Biker Scout, it can crack over time.
Oh, it cracks at seams, like underneath the armpits, underneath the
Stress
breastplates.
points,
yeah, stress points. Yeah, though I mean that's just a common thing. A lot of people will fiberglass behind it, but once again, that's just a whole nother. Lots of other people that can explain that better than us that are more experienced cosplayers. YouTube, Rexing Around is a great source for that. Let's talk about Etsy. Etsy is a place where you can go, and Ben, you're going to explain more on this, where you can buy files to be able to print on your printer. So let's walk through a couple of sellers that you recommend, and then maybe explain the process of uploading a file to the printer and then printing it.
Well, a couple of things. I don't even know if I'd necessarily go straight to Etsy. It really just depends on what your end goal is. There is a website called Thingiverse where there's a lot of free files. Some of those are very good. I have quite a few free files. The lightsaber I just showed, which is an incredible file, that's a free file. No
I'd
cost.
say Reddit too. Reddit is probably a place where you could find
some
free files too.
I haven't really been on Reddit for that. I'm in some Facebook groups that are really good in the Star Wars community. There are some sellers that are very well regarded. The Mando helmet that I showed, if you're going to buy something Mando for armor, I would no doubt go to Great Ape. I think it's Darren, is it Patterson? I put it in here. We'll make sure. Pattenden. So Darren Pattenden, and it's Great Ape, and it's very affordable. I can't remember what the helmet was. I think it was like $30 for the files for that. But if you're going to put that much time into printing it and sanding it to whatever degree it needs sanded, and that's chrome, so there's a whole beast in the airbrushing and the techniques. If you're going to invest that much time into the prep work, the cost of $30 to have the best
to save
file
yourself for the prep
is
work.
nothing.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to do is spend 2 weeks on a project that later realize, oh well, it's not accurate, or it may not reach the level of approval required for the 501st.
501st,
if that's a goal, and that may not be a goal of yours. So that's why your goals come. Are probably the first question to be asked. What do you plan on doing with it? And there's people that also don't even want to wear the armor. There's people that only want it to be on a mannequin.
A shelf queen is what I'd call it.
Or a mannequin in their, I mean, there's people that have like a home theater room with all Star Wars or their office. They don't have any intention of wearing it. And that's what opens up some different options.
Well, if they want that, shouldn't they just buy a Novos, Ben?
A Novos...
That was just a joke, man. Whole nother episode. Whole nother.
We'll get into that. So this is actually an Novos helmet, and I have ordered a lot of other Novos products, and they never arrived. 3.5 years later, and having to go through Lucasfilm, actually.
Yeah.
The senior vice president of marketing or of licensing, and there was a lot of shady stuff at Novos, and I finally got it back, and I kind of know a little more about them. We'll talk about
Novos another time. We'll talk about Novos another time. Let's talk about you had something mentioned here, Sean Fields. Once again,
Sean Fields is actually in the 501st in my garrison. I met him a couple of years ago, and he's the one I initially talked to.
What's your garrison, and you're located in Texas?
So I'm TB 50426. I'm located in the North Texas Star Garrison. Star Garrison is Texas, and I'm in the North Texas Garrison. TB is specific to a biker scout. So I'm not done with the shore trooper build back there, which is in the case. So I went ahead and my wife bought me a really awesome biker scout, which is made by RS Prop Mesters in England, in Manchester. It wasn't cheap, but it is the most screen accurate that you can get. It has a lineage that dates back, so they can actually use a lot of the actual parts and armor to mold from. It's a really, really good company. So it just kind of depends.
Yeah, it just depends. And what about so more on you said that you were in some Facebook groups, some great places. What would you search on Facebook if you were looking for,
what I'd recommend,
Star Wars cosplayers is one that I'm in. That's where I would
go.
You'll
have to send me an invite.
Okay.
Most
I can do that.
most of the groups that I'm in are specific to either a genre or a specific character. So there's several that are for just the Mandalorian.
Yes. Yep.
The TV show and the characters found or props found within the Mandalorian. There's also a number of Facebook groups that are specific to one particular character. So like there's a Shore Trooper Fam, which is all Shore Trooper. There's a Death Trooper Facebook group, which is on my radar.
I love Death Troopers. Yeah.
I'm
not tall enough. I'm not tall enough to be a Death Trooper.
It's in the best movie ever made.
I'm not tall enough to be a Death Trooper though, so I don't fit the bill. I don't fit the bill.
S tier, I believe.
Listen, I agree with. Listen, shout outs to our last episode where me and Justin broke down every Star Wars visual media. I agree, okay, but
one typo, I'll let it slide.
Like, listen, I was sliding it up and it didn't go high enough. Okay, it just didn't go high enough.
Yeah.
I think this was a great introduction, Ben. I think that we gave people a great idea. I think some of the bullet points that they need to understand is they need to probably have an understanding of how much money they can spend, right? Because I think that they can have a direct, obviously they have a direct amount that they can spend. They need to have a direction. They can do that research.
And start with something small. Get some practice in.
Yeah.
You can always make some small props. You can make thermal detonators, lightsabers on really any printer, resin or filament.
This is a good question that's asked. A
Yeah.
lot of people ask, Ben, do you need a PC to have a 3D printer?
I'm a Mac, so you don't have to have a PC.
Home computer.
You do have to run the program a slicer, and what that basically is you take a 3D model and then you run it through a slicer, and it'll be a slicer specific to either a resin printer or filament printer. And another episode we can get into which slicers are popular for each. And what a slicer does is it takes that 3D model and slices it to individual layers that the printer will then use to print the model back into its 3D form.
Do you have to pay, and we can talk about this, that's actually probably a great place to start on the next episode, but do you have to pay for slicer programs?
There is a brand new option that offers a paid subscription. For a paid subscription, it's very cheap. It's $4 a month. I'm not even using the paid subscription yet, and I really haven't noticed that much of any features lacking. But still, you're talking about a $4 subscription. Yeah. So it's not cost prohibitive.
$4 usually ain't gonna make or break.
Most, But most of the really good options are either free or, in that case, $4 a month, which is inexpensive.
Yeah, maybe I probably should have brought that up earlier. It was something that just dawned on me. It's kind of because I already have an introduction. I've done a lot of research myself. I've been looking into getting into a printer for a while. I've been doing cosplay. It was something that was kind of second nature to me, knowing that I would need X, Y, and Z to get into that. But once again, this was the introduction. Probably should have mentioned that, beforehand. But going into the next episode, Ben, what do you think is some of the more detailed things that we should be talking about? Let's tease the people. If you had to say that now we've given the introduction as far as, your recommendation.
I don't know what you want to focus on next time. If you'd to get into, if you'd like to focus on either resin versus filament, or if you'd like to see some of the things you can focus on with just filament.
I would definitely say probably the resin, because filament I think has been around definitely a little bit longer.
I'm more excited than the resin after only owning it for a month than I am for the filament, which I've owned for over a year.
Yeah, for sure.
It's literally game changing, and the size now is not so prohibitive. I could do a helmet with it, and it's so smooth.
Yeah.
And worst case scenario, I have to do it in pieces and glue it together, but. Man, it's awesome.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm super jealous. And once again, You did have a recommendation. You talked about the $200 introductory printer, and that was the resin printer, if I'm correct, and that was the brand of the printer that's sitting right behind you. And what was that one again?
It's an Anycubic.
Okay.
I didn't think about which one to recommend because honestly, I didn't research the smaller printers. I knew I wanted to print blasters, so I went ahead and bit the bullet and spent the money to not prohibit me in size. But we can certainly touch on those next week, or
for sure.
You can post links to them below of which ones.
And then the one that me and you have talked about extensively off camera, the one that I'm probably leaning into more, the CR10 Pro, correct?
I believe CR10S Pro, I believe.
CR10S Pro, yes.
There's quite a few CR10 variants. The newest two are the CR10
V2,
Pro.
yes, there's a version 2, yep.
Yeah, and the CR10 Max, which is what I have. So we'll get into that later. There's a few features and technologies. I would say it's a lot more finicky on filament printers, and any extra features you can have will help, especially with bed leveling. But that's something else that you just don't have to worry about with a resin printer. So I would recommend one of those two printers if you can. The Max is really big and it's expensive. The Max is a $1,000 printer. And then I immediately went out and had to spend a little bit of money to get a different hot end to do hotter temperatures for a better plastic, which is recommended for humid climates. It can withstand higher heat. It doesn't
like
warp.
Florida.
It doesn't warp if you leave it in your car, which is horrible. Guys make armor and 6 months to print and paint and get it ready, and then you leave it in a hot car.
It ruins it, really.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, I didn't know that. So, guys, we definitely have much more to get into on the next episode. Next episode, we're definitely going to talk more detail into resin printing, and I think we're going to get into more of the details as far as just definitely a continuation of directions on where you can go, what you can look for. I think that I'm going to do a little bit more research myself. We can have some actual models.
Your printer will be here in time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, probably. We got that STEMI check, it's sitting in the Amazon cart. So, by next week, 2-day shipping. It's a Prime item. So,
you'll let me know.
Yeah, it'll be here. Guys, once again, next week, definitely going to talk more about the resin. Definitely, I'm sure some FDM is going to come up. Some filament stuff is also going to come up there. We're going to have some bullet points for you, basically some Facebook groups to look into. I do have a couple of more YouTubers that I follow that are cosplay and prop makers. And next week, we're also going to touch base on not only Benjamin's experience with the 501st, my experience with the Mandalorian mercs. Basically, probably Star Wars costuming groups as a whole. Definitely some differing opinions that'll be coming out on that, and what our experiences on, quote, Lucasfilm approved costuming groups as a whole, and we'll be talking more about 3D printing. But I was your boy. It's KonKon, and of course, thank you so much for joining us this week. Ben, tell them your Instagram one more time for us.
Benjamin Asher.
Guys, once again, feel free to join the Facebook group. Check us out on Instagram. There you'll be finding more of this discussion. We're going to be posting some of the things that Ben has done in recent with his printing so that you can see what kind of stuff that is. And join the conversation, guys. That's where a lot of these ideas for these episodes are coming from, is from the Facebook group, from the Discord, and all that stuff. And we would very much greatly appreciate to see you there. Thank you guys very much. We will see you next week.